to Jordan, and we're exploring Petra and Wadi Rum with High Places Travel Company. I don't know if any of you know High Places. We've travelled with them several times. We climbed Kilimanjaro, Mount Kenya, and various places with them. So it was lovely to see some of the people that to hear about some of the people we knew. And as you know, I'm an ambassador for Sendikau. You may remember Martin and Anne when they did their talk about Zambia. They were talking about the difficulties in Zambia during this current pandemic. And of course, for people who haven't got clean running water, it's really difficult to keep health and hygiene going. So this is one of Sendikau's solutions. It's called a tip tap. It's a very simple wooden structure with a foot lever, a string, and at the top you can see a plastic bottle. And the plastic bottle is filled with water. It has a little hole in it. And when you depress the foot lever, it tips up and you get a trickle of water to wash your hands. And it's a brilliant way of helping to keep clean, especially during this current pandemic. So a donation of £13 provides the training and the equipment to make a tip tap, which is making a big difference. I was in one of the African countries, Ethiopia, some time ago, and I met a lady. She was very excited. She said, come and see what I've got. And she got the wooden frame, she got the foot lever, and she got the string, but sadly she was saving up for a plastic bottle. So you can see it's not quite as easy as it is in this country, but hopefully she's got her plastic bottle by now. So on to our trip. We flew into Amman, and from there we met our fellow travellers. We met Robert, our guide, and we travelled from Amman down here, down through the Dead Sea, into Kerak, down to Petra, onto Aquaba for 2 nights, I think, and then all the way back along the desert highway to Amman. Oh, Wadi Rum, sorry, I missed out Wadi Rum. We spent 4 very exciting nights in Wadi Rum before we went to Aquaba, and then back up the desert highway to fly out from Amman. So that was our trip in a nutshell. And this was Robert, our guide. As I said, I'd have taken much better photographs if I'd known I was going to do presentations like this. But anyway, Robert was a very knowledgeable guide. He was a lovely chap, and he certainly knew his stuff. And this was one of the milestones, the Byzantine pilgrims travelling from Jerusalem to Mount Nebo. This was just by the side of the road. Yes, it was a milestone. I'm sorry. So we went onto the lower slopes of Mount Nebo, and this was actually the entrance to, it was used to protect one of the Byzantine monasteries, and it was called the Abu Bad. And I'm sure you'd agree if that was rowed across the entrance, you wouldn't get past it. And then we started walking up Mount Nebo. We had to book, I think we got a block booking, so there was no problem. And you may not be able to see the, oh sorry, let me go back. The Brazen Serpent. And this was a representation by an Italian artist, Giovanni Fantoni, and it was symbolic of the bronze serpent that Moses created in the wilderness, and the cross on which Jesus died. And here we can see views of the Jordan Valley, where Moses climbed up to view the promised land, the land of Canaan. The views were superb. It was a bit hazy. Robert pointed out the city of Jericho, the West Bank, and perhaps Jerusalem, though it was so shady we weren't absolutely sure. But nevertheless, the views were absolutely stunning. And from there, we went to the Dead Sea. Now, the Dead Sea is the second saltiest sea in the world, And we had an argument about that, but when we looked it up, it actually is. The saltiest is the Don Juan Pond in Antarctica. So how's that for useless information? Anyway, the second saltiest sea in the world, and because of evaporation, sadly, it's shrinking all the time. And the southern end of it is now simply salt flats. There's no water left. The mud along the shores contains many minerals. It's believed to be medicinal and therapeutic. And I bought a face pack, which promised me everlasting beauty, but sadly failed. And this is the Pillar of Salt. You probably know the story from the Old Testament of Sodom and Gomorrah, which were two towns on a peninsula out into the Dead Sea. But the people there had got so wicked and sinful that God decided he was going to destroy the two towns. But he warned Lot, who was a good and obedient man, to flee with his family. But God said to them, when you flee, don't turn back. And sadly, of course, Lot's wife did, and it's turned into the Pillar of Salt. So there we are. And then we went on to Madaba, which was a small market town, and it had the most stunning mosaics all over the place. This one is a representation taken from the floor of one of the churches. And you can see there the walled city of Jerusalem. You can see the Dead Sea, and the fish are turning back when they get to the Dead Sea and find it's too salty. So all the fish are fleeing in terror. And the map, the whole map, I'll show you later. It shows Jerusalem, Bethlehem, the Dead Sea, Jericho, the Mediterranean, Mount Sinai, the Nile Delta, Kerak, and Hebron. It was very hard to distinguish them all, but it was all pointed out to us on the floor model. Church of the Martyrs with the most beautiful decorations and mosaics everywhere, absolutely lovely. And this was the mosaic floor map of the Holy Land. It was in St. George's Church. The church was built in 1814 over the remains of an old Byzantine church. And the guide pointed out all these things. Absolutely beautiful. It's very faded, as you can see, and nobody's allowed to walk on it. But it was a real privilege to see it. So he pointed out, as I said, the Dead Sea, walled city of Jerusalem, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and the River Jordan and the Nile Delta. And then we went to the Mosaic Museum and the Mosaic School. And here's a lady you can see in a wheelchair, and she's learning to replicate some of the mosaics. And there was some for sale up in front. And from there, we went on to Kerak Castle. And it was a huge place, a large Crusader castle begun in the 1140s under Pagan Fulk, the King of Jerusalem. And because of its position on the King's Highway, it can control the trade routes from Damascus to Egypt and Mecca. So it was very powerful. It was besieged by Saladin on 2 occasions, but he couldn't penetrate the castle. 2 attempts a year between them. But sadly, on December the 18th, just before Christmas in 2016, there was a terrorist attack, which I remember very sadly reading about. So we went in, we walked among the ruined walls and looked at all those cannonballs. You imagine being hit by one of them.
Pretty sizable, aren't they?
Mm.
And then we went to Petra. So we stayed in Wadi Musa, which is the Valley of Moses. And we had the most wonderful views of the Bedouin Village, which I think was up here. I'll talk more about that later. But Wadi Musa was a nice little place. And we found a lovely Irish pub, which we frequented quite often in the 2 nights we were there. So a lovely place. And then on to Petra. Sorry, somebody? No. We couldn't get a decent map of Petra anywhere. I'm sure there was one, but we couldn't find it. So this is the entrance. This is the Sikh. And here are some of the famous buildings, the Treasury, the Street of Facades. I've forgotten what that is. And the museums. We walked right up to the monastery up here, and on another occasion we climbed up onto these hills here, and we had a stunning view back down to the Treasury. So we spent 2 days in Petra, and it really was interesting. Here you can see the entrance to the Sikh. It was rediscovered, Petra was rediscovered in 1812 by a Swiss traveller and geographer who was named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt. And he hired a guide from Wadi Musa. He'd heard about Petra and he was trying to find it. And he told this guide that he wanted to make a sacrifice at the tomb of Moses' brother, which was believed to be inside Petra. So the unsuspecting guide took him, and that was the end of their privacy, I'm afraid. But since then, it's been a tourist haven. So it's a honeycomb of caves and temples and tombs carved from the pink sandstone, absolutely stunning. 2,000 years old, and it was carved by the Nabateans, who dominated the trade routes. They were a nomadic desert people, and their wealth grew from the incense trade. So they were going between the Mediterranean and the Arabian Seas, from Egypt to Syria and on to Greece, trading in incense. The Romans arrived in 638 and they added to all the constructions. So the Sikh is actually a cleft in the rock, and it was caused by a geographic fault, I suppose. And inside there are small dams and water channels. So this is the water supply into Petra, and these channels were actually put there to prevent flooding. It was a masterpiece of engineering. And there you can see lots of tourists going in. There were guides outside wanting to get business. They were offering horses to take you in, donkeys, camels, all sorts. And then inside there were more guides with camels and all waiting for customers. But of course we got all that sorted out. We had our own guide, and Robert himself was really knowledgeable. But they were getting quite good business. And this was the first business we saw, the first building we saw. We walked in, and the absolutely stunning treasury. It's a tomb, and it was carved from the top down, which seems amazing to believe, but so intricate. The Nabatean craftsmen, as I said, working from the top down into the very soft sandstone. And of course, there's a lot of erosion now. Because it was the treasury, the Bedouins believed that there might be treasure in these artifacts up here. So many times they've taken pot shots at it, but they haven't actually managed to find any treasure. So I think they were on a non-starter there. They believed the treasure was in these urns. And there was a lovely soldier there guarding the treasury. He was beautifully dressed, and he got all his bullets and his guns. I don't think it was ever fired, but he did look impressive. And there were more buildings. I think this is the Street of Facades. It was strange because there was nothing much behind them. They were all tombs or storerooms, some of them, but beautifully, intricately carved. And because it was so well concealed, the Nabateans lived there quite happily without any interference for many, many years. That's another view of the facades. The ladder rather spoils the impression, but there we are. I think they're constantly being preserved. It must be very hard to stop the sandstone wearing away, I think. Beautiful buildings everywhere. You can see the erosion. Look at the colours there. It looks like marble, doesn't it? Absolutely stunning. Everywhere you looked, it was just amazing. And we climbed right up high to the monastery. It was quite a climb. I think there were some very worn steps to climb up, but we managed it. And we went into the monastery. And that was the view looking out. And we had another steep climb after that. And as I said, there's nothing much behind these facades. It was just an empty room. And then we had a steep climb out of the valley. I think there were steps that you can't see there. And we went up to the high place of sacrifice. And because it's an Islamist country, of course, the sacrifices needed all the blood drained from them. And these were the channels to drain the blood away. So that was the high place of sacrifice, where the Nabateans used to sacrifice. They used to sacrifice animals to celebrate Eid. And then we did another big climb up on the opposite side of the valley to the Treasury. And here we could see this superb view looking down on the Treasury. There weren't many tourists around at that time. I think it was quite a late afternoon. But yes, a wonderful, wonderful climb. And then the rock caves. Now, I want to talk quite a bit about the rock caves. And this was where the Petra Bedouin people lived. But it was decided, for reasons of hygiene and because there were so many tourists around, that they were going to be rehomed. The Bedouin weren't very keen on it for quite a long while, but there was a lot of work done. And eventually, they were rehoused in the Bedouin Village, which I showed you in 1985. So they all had to move out. Now, just before we left home, I don't know if you can see it, I've got this book here, Married to a Bedouin by Marguerite van Geldermalsen. And Marguerite was a nurse from New Zealand, and she travelled to Petra with a friend. They met one of the guides in the entrance outside the Treasury. His name was Mohammed, and he was a very charismatic chap, very young, very handsome. And Marguerite fell for him there and then. So she went off with her friend. I think her friend went to Israel, and Marguerite decided she would go back to Petra, where she decided that she and Mohammed would get married. It was very brave, really. But anyway, they did marry, and they lived in one of the 2,000-year-old caves on the hillside. She learned Arabic, she converted to Islam, and had 3 children. And some details from her book: they had a civil marriage ceremony in Amman, and people in the office were utterly bewildered that she didn't have all the details of her great-great-grandfather, because in Islam communities they have all that information. But anyway, they had the ceremony, then they went back to Petra and had a Bedouin ceremony, which lasted for several days. She became a nurse at the local health centre, and she was given a local name of Fatima by her husband's family. So she was called Fatima until she had her first child, and her child was a daughter called Salwa. So then she became known as Salwa, which means mother of Salwa. But unfortunately, boys have precedence in that area. So when her second child was boy, Rami, she became known as Rami, and Salwa didn't get a look in after that. They had one more child, and they were visited in Petra by the Queen and Prince Philip in 1984. And there was a large Bedouin tent set out in the valley, and certain people were invited to go and meet the Queen and Prince Philip and have tea with them. And she had obviously been, the Queen had been very well briefed. She knew all about the family, and she made them welcome. And Muhammad had made a little glass souvenir. I'm sure you've seen them, multicolored suns in a little glass jar. And so Salwa went to present it to the Queen, but it disappeared into the hands of one of the aides and was never seen again, unfortunately. It received lots of publicity, headlines around the world, and a friend sent them a newspaper from South Africa, and the headline was "The Kiwi and the Caveman." But the one that really made her mum cry was a TV news presenter. I don't know which broadcaster it was, but ended with, "And so they departed, the head of the Commonwealth for her palace, and her subject, a most unusual one, for her cave." And it perhaps wasn't very sensitive. Anyway, I was delighted to meet Marguerite. She was there. Her husband had died 2 years before we went, and she'd been to New Zealand for a while. She'd lived in Australia. She wrote her book and realised how much she was missing Petra. So she came back, and it was wonderful to see her and to be able to talk to her. She had actually, she was part of a consortium, the ladies in the village, and they were making all these jewellery and trinkets to sell, and then the proceeds were shared out. So it was a real privilege to meet her and to talk to her. It's absolutely wonderful. She told me that 2 older children had been educated in New Zealand. Salwa was now a teacher in Oman, and her middle child, Rami, went to Sydney University, and he's now in electronics. And Maruan, the youngest one, there he is. Beautiful New Zealand accent. He was a lovely lad, and he's now a driver around Petra. So it was absolutely wonderful to see them and to be able to talk to her and find out her story. And if anyone's interested in the book, there you can see the details. It's still available online. And doing this talk inspired me to read it again, which I've really enjoyed. Now we're almost at the end of the first session. Has anybody got any questions for us? I can't see if there's anything.
Yeah, I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
There's a question about what size is the pillar of salt?
Oh, goodness.
And I have just Googled it, but I've lost it now on my phone. Oh, here it is. Do you want me to read? I don't know how long we've got.
Yes,
We've got 2 minutes remaining.
2 minutes, yeah. Go on then.
It's about 80% salt, a genuine mountain, 7 miles long, 1/4 mile wide, 720 feet high, capped by a layer of limestone, clays and conglomerate that the salt dragged along when it was squeezed up from the valley floor. Anyway, I can't really follow that too well, but anyway, it's obviously quite amazing. And then there's another question: was Petra the only base for Nabateans? Right?
Nabateans. I don't know. I really don't know that.
Was their main point.
That was certainly their main point, and they travelled along the King's Highway, and I think they always came back to Petra, but I don't know enough about them to be able to say really.
And then another question from Ted and Janet: did you find 2 days enough to see Petra? I'm sure the answer must be no. No, we'd have loved to spend more time. We were on a very tight schedule sadly. Yes, there was lots more to see that we didn't see. And we spent a lot of time walking around just on our own, wandering. Yes, I'd love to go back.
Brilliant.
Good.
Absolutely fine.
We seem to be fraught today, don't we? Anyway, we've now left Petra and we're on the road travelling south. And this is what the road was like: lots of animals, lots of children on donkeys, and we're travelling down towards Wadi Rum. And I'll tell you a bit about Wadi Rum in a minute. So we stopped on the edge of Wadi Rum to look at this terrific rock formation. It's the 7 Pillars of Wisdom. And it was made famous, of course, by T. Lawrence, who was out in the desert. And he wrote a book, the autobiographical account of his experience during the Arab Revolt. And he called it The Seven Pillars of Wisdom. So this is the absolutely stunning sandstone rock formation, which we saw. Okay. And then we had 4 nights in the desert, Wadi Rum. And I've got a leaflet here that tells us all about it. It's a protected area. The protected area was created in 1998, and it covers 720 square kilometres of outstanding desert landscape. World-class opportunities for trekking, for camping, for climbing. But there's quite a lot about climbing in this literature. You're not allowed to put in any fixed protection. So no pitons, no boats, no fixed ladders, no fixed ropes, nothing. Everything has to be left entirely natural. And I don't think you're allowed in on your own. I think you have to go with guides. Lots of animals, which unfortunately we didn't see, but apparently there are some, the Nubian ibex and Veru's eagle. And if you see them, they're very rare, so you're asked to report them. But sadly, we didn't see any of them. So we had 4 nights in Wadi Rum. We gathered in Wadi Rum, in Rum Village, and we met the guides. And then we travelled through the desert to various places. And this was our guide's home. So he took us into his home. We all sat around on these cushions. I think there were 10 of us, plus Robert, our guide. And he took us in, he served us tea. We had a lovely mint tea, I think, didn't we? And he talked to us about the do's and don'ts of being in the desert. And one of the things he asked us was, did we want tents? Now, high places had already emphasized to us before we went the joy of wild camping out in the desert without a tent, so you can lie in bed and look up at the sky. So I think most of us agreed we would do that. We wouldn't have tents. There was one gentleman who wanted a tent, so he was given a small one. But for most of us, it was an exciting adventure. So we sat in here while he talked to us about Wadi Rum, what to expect, what we could do, what we couldn't do. Somebody mentioned the police because they've read about some problems in the desert. And Sabah, our guide, looked us in the eye and said, we are the police in Wadi Rum. So we took that to mean they knew what they were doing. Anyway, we had a very pleasant hour there. I think he served us a tagine as well, and we met his wife. And then we were off into the desert. So they loaded all our gear into the, we had 2 vehicles, one with our bags and things, and the other one with cooking pots and all the things we'd need for our 4 days in the desert. Right. And these were our 3 guides. That's Sabah, his son, one with the tea towel on his head, and a friend. I can't remember the friend's name, but they were all lovely. They were all Muslim, of course, so they went off discreetly to pray at various times during the day. But they were smashing, they really were, and made us feel so welcome. So there they are, making our afternoon tea, and everything was done on open fires, which was wonderful. Okay, right, here we are, a prat in a hat. Anyway, Trevor bought these. The scarf is called a Mendeel, and the cloth ring is a Maria.
Still got it upstairs?
Pardon?
Still got it upstairs?
We've still got them, though I haven't seen him wear them since. But obviously they were to protect his head in the sunlight. And I think Sabah told him how to put it on, or did it for him, I can't remember. But this was Rum Village just before we left. And then we're immediately out into the desert and our first climb, as you can see, which is scramble up through the rocks. And there is Trevor. I'm sure he wasn't leading the way. There must have been one of the guides in front. And while we were walking, a lovely little girl came. She looked about 8 or 9, and she had all these goats, and she was out in the desert in charge of the goats. I'd love to have taken a photograph of her, but when I asked Sabah, it was obvious that he didn't want me to, which was a real shame. But anyway, I got a good photograph of the goats. And they were very tame, obviously used to people, very curious, wanted to see what we're doing. And there were just more and more of them pouring over the top. And then suddenly the little girl stood up and wandered off, and all the goats went with her. It was quite a magical experience, really. So 4 nights in the desert. And our first aim was to climb the Burdah Arch. And here you can see the arch, which which we're going to climb up to. No fixed ropes, as I said, so Sabah had a rope and he looped it round a bit of rock and told us to climb up them. For some reason, he wanted me to climb up first. I don't know why, but anyway, I did. And it was quite a scramble, but we managed it. And there's us posing at the bottom before we started off. Yes. And here you can see the scramble. The one on the left, Trevor's got his arms open as if to say, slide down, I'll catch you. I'm not quite sure what he was doing. In the second one, Trevor is attached to the rope and he's scrambling over a particularly difficult bit. But we all managed it without any real problems. But as you can see, it was quite a scramble up.
The rock is not slippy, it's quite rough on the underfoot. So you get a good grip, both with hands and feet.
4 points of contact, as they say.
And teeth if you feel like it.
And there's some more.
So it's quite a climb up. People were just following one after another, helping each other out.
Yes, I think it took us quite a while, didn't it?
Yeah.
And there we are, we've made it to the top, and there's Trevor posing on the top of the arch. And the views from there, as you can imagine, are absolutely stunning.
Here you can see pictures of the desert as well. There's that many rocky outcrops across the desert, but it's all obviously just sand, no trees, nothing at all.
And that's a wonderful view. Some scrubby little plants there. I'm not quite sure what they were. And just go back a bit. I was going to mention that balanced rock. Yes, a strange balanced rock there, look. It looks a bit precarious, but I'm sure it wasn't. And more views everywhere you looked. It was just off to the horizon and very hazy in the distance. And we just walked and walked for miles. Yeah, very hot, very dry.
The sand, as you can imagine, it was quite soft, so it's quite hard to walk on. It's quite tiring at times.
And this was our first campsite. And as I said, we didn't have any tents. So we just stopped. We had 2 mattresses and we had our sleeping bags and our blow-up pillows, I think. And we just laid them out at a discreet distance from each other. And then we all gathered for our meal and went to bed. And it was quite stunning out in the desert to see the stars and the moon come up. We'd been warned that you put your boots into your bag and zip it up, because there are desert foxes which are quite partial to the smell of sweaty boots, so you have to be rather careful.
You can see the campsite underneath the rock arch here. It's quite spectacular at night.
And you can only camp in certain places, designated places, designated by the local Bedouin, I suppose. Lovely view of an archway there, and you can see the rock formations, quite stunning. And there we are, just posing on the rocks. Sabah's pointing something out, I can't remember what it was, but we spent a lot of time just sitting and looking, absolutely wonderful. And here we are on another ledge. You can see Sabah's dagger there in his belt. and we're just looking out over the sand dunes.
I think we were just resting there after we climbed up.
There's lots of climbing every day. We were climbing and then relaxing on the ledges.
Okay.
Yes. And this was another camp at night. There you can see the little tent that one person had, but most of us, as you can see, were just scattered around. The vehicles parked in the middle.
Here you can see the feet of our sleeping bags. So we were just sleeping out at night with the stars coming up. It was fantastic at night. I remember seeing the moon coming up over my head.
Yes. And the sounds of the foxes. We never saw them, but we heard them at night. Quite eerie. What was that formation?
Oh, the lens. It's a fisheye lens. It was wider view.
And here we are packing up after we've been camping overnight and getting ready to start our trek for the day. So we had lovely meals cooked by our guide, and then after breakfast, I think breakfast was omelets, wasn't it?
Something like that, yeah.
And then we packed up and we were ready to start trekking again.
Nobody's mentioned toilets yet.
No, I'm sure somebody will. I've often said before I could do a whole talk about toilets around the world. We went to this Bedouin tent. It was just out in the wilds, a goatskin tent, and we were invited in. It was obviously a permanent one. It hadn't just been put up. So we were invited in and they made us welcome. They gave us drinks. And one of them had an instrument which he played for us and described to us. And we spent about an hour there. I think we had food, and it was lovely. I really enjoyed it.
A bit smelly, but it was nice.
And then we're heading back now. So we're in the desert near to Lawrence's Spring. And this well had been built into the spring to protect it from animals, I think. And he's demonstrating how you can get water out from it. The water was quite near the top. I think there was a good supply of water. So Sabah was demonstrating it to us. And then this is the actual spring. The spring comes down behind these plants. And it was the only place in the whole of the desert where we saw a large number of plants.
So the time we saw in the water as well.
Yes, and the only time where we saw water. So that was really interesting. And the plants were fascinating. Things I've never seen before.
Something?
Yes.
Do you want to move?
Yes. Lots of interesting little plants. Very sparse, but it was good to see them.
Okay.
Yes. And there are some more. The only flower we saw, I don't know what sort of flower it was. And there's one there, unfortunately, you can't see behind everybody's faces.
Okay.
Yes. And then we sat beside Lawrence Spring. You can see a tree there. And we just contemplated for a while because it was nearly time to head off. And Sabah's sitting there looking very relaxed. I think he's smoking. And we were just looking out into the desert. And we spent a good hour just contemplating before we met our transport back. So we're packing up there. We'd had our last meal. We're packing the vehicles. You can see all our mattresses ready to be packed. And we're ready to go.
For water, the truck had got I think it was a 40-gallon drum on the back, completely full of water.
More scenes.
The one on the picture on the left there is when it was getting a bit windy, so you can see all the sky was totally covered in dust and just floating through the air. You could say it was a sandstorm, but it wasn't that much.
we've been in the desert before, and you come home with all this sand which you have to shake out of all your equipment when you get back. Okay, so time to go, and our camels were waiting for us, and mine was the most recalcitrant beast you can imagine. It was terrible. It was very, very uncomfortable, and every time I shifted to try and get comfortable, it turned around and snarled at me. It was quite frightening in a way. But I have ridden on camels before, and I don't find them at all comfortable. But anyway, we made it. And when we got back towards the village, it was quite funny because the camels wanted to turn off to the left, which was their home, and they hadn't to go to the left. They had to carry on to Sabah's place, but they were very reluctant. And I think it took a good deal of shouting by the guides to get them to go past the turning for their homes.
This trip on the camels was about 2 hours long, so it was uncomfortable, to say the least.
Yes. So there we are, and the guides were very good. They made sure we were okay, and made sure that the camels behaved. But I had a great fear of this one of mine taking a bite out of my leg because it was so cross with me every time I moved. Yes, as Trevor said, it was quite a long trek back, but still stunning scenery, so it made it all worthwhile. And then we left Wadi Rum. We were very sad to go because we'd had a wonderful 4 days, and down to Aqaba, which was on the coast, lazing by the Gulf of Aquaba, a bit of snorkeling at the beach club. And it was interesting to see the Muslim ladies going into the water fully clad. They'd taken off their dark garments. I think they were wearing white, weren't they?
Yes, yeah.
But head to toe, all covered. And they just went into the water in all their garments. So we spent a couple of days relaxing, and we could see over into Israel.
Yeah, for the historical ones, people will remember that Lawrence of Arabia took at Aqaba with all the Arabs. It's right down on the Red Sea.
Yes, there you can see
There's
the map, the Gulf of Aquaba.
Aqaba there with the Latin Israel, and the Gulf of Aquaba, and then you cross to Egypt just here.
Mm.
And that's all Egypt as well. So you can actually see it, and you're right on the corner of Saudi Arabia as well. So you
Perhaps not the safest area in the world.
well, it wasn't. No, okay.
And that was the Aqaba side, where we could see the Jordan flag, and over the other side we could see the Israeli flag.
Yeah, they're like big flags there. Huge, great big flagpoles with a massive flag on it.
But it was nice just wandering around, and these terrific cliffs behind the town. Just amazing. But a very pleasant place to wander around, and people were so friendly and welcoming, and they wanted to know where we were from and where we'd been and what we'd been doing. It really was nice. So that's more or less the end. Photographs I hadn't got and couldn't find, I took from Wikipedia, and one of them was from World Maps. So that's the end of my slideshow. And if anybody would like to make a donation, just go onto the Sendcow website, and down at the bottom, just click it.
Thank you very much, Wendy. That was fantastic.
That's the end of it, yes?
Yeah, definitely. We've got some questions here, Wendy. Shall I read them out?
Yes, do.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a question from Kate asking, did the desert foxes sound like our red foxes?
Yes, it's a funny sort of yipping noise. We've seen them in Egypt. We never actually saw any in Wadi Rum, but we knew they were there. Totally harmless, I think, and very shy. so they're very hard to see. But yes, the sound was similar. I have heard our red foxes mating, and it's a pretty scary noise. We didn't hear any of that.
Mm. And then there's a question from Ted and Janet. How hot was it?
It varied. It got quite cold at night, hot during the day, very dry. There was a breeze at times. So I don't think it particularly bothered us. We had plenty of water all the time. And I think that's the secret, just keep drinking water. But it wasn't excessively hot at all.
And then there's a question from Ian, which I think would probably be Sue's Ablett's question as well. What were the toilet and bathing facilities in the desert like?
Sorry, the toilets and the what?
What were the toilet and bathing facilities in the desert like?
Right. Bathing facilities were absolutely nil. You had wet wipes or nothing. Or we could have a bowl of water. I think wet wipes are just easier. Toilets, I knew somebody would ask about toilets. There weren't any toilets. You were given a shovel and a toilet roll and you disappeared round the corner. Ladies one side, men the other side, and you were requested to dig a hole and bury everything, which was quite easy in the sand. And we're not strangers to that. We've done it in all sorts of places. And provided it's well buried, it doesn't seem to be a problem.
Okay. How are we doing for time, Pete? Is it
5 minutes?
Well, yeah. Okay. So there's there's another question.
We have 8 minutes left.
Okay. Thank you. About the instrument you showed the gentleman playing. What was the instrument made out of, and did it have a name?
I'm sure it did, but I'm afraid I've forgotten. It was made out of wood with strings, I suppose. I don't know, gut strings, I suppose. And it had a peculiar tinny sort of sound, but I think it was made out of wood.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Yes, I can't remember the name of it. I'm sorry. As I said, if I'd known I was going to be doing talks about it, I'd have been much more diligent about getting information.
No, it's amazing. We can all turn to Google, can't we?
Yes.
Right. And then from Jenny, what would you say was the highlight of the holiday?
Oh goodness, I think meeting Marguerite.
Yeah.
Particularly because I'd read her
Yeah.
book. A friend was very jealous because she'd pointed me at the book, but when she was in Petra, she hadn't actually met Marguerite, so I was one up on her.
Yeah.
I think, yes, going to Petra and just being in the desert, it was absolutely wonderful. The whole atmosphere, sleeping out in the desert, the climbing. It was just a wonderful holiday, the whole thing. I'd love to go back.
For me, the desert was the highlight of it. It's so different to anywhere, you know, most people have been. And when you're right out in the middle of it, it's great.
There's one there. Did we travel with a particular company? Yes, we were with High Places, which is based in Sheffield. Look them up. They do some super adventure holidays. But you have to be prepared to rough it.
Yeah. We only rough it for about 2 weeks and then come back to a bath. Or shower.
That's true. Yes. Yes.
I know when Wendy has terrified us on many occasions about the kind of exploits she gets up to.
We've done many of them with High Places. We climbed Kilimanjaro and Mount Kenya with them, and it's a super company.
Brilliant. So, I mean, obviously we can't do anything yet, but where will your next trip be to, Wendy?
Well, I don't know. We haven't really decided on anything. We've had so many things cancelled over the last few weeks. We're just waiting to see. But there are still lots of places in the world that we want to go to. So we shall see. Watch this space.
Watch this space, yeah.
I saw a question there about sand.
Yes. Did the sand irritate us?
Not really.
No, I don't think it did. We've been in other deserts where the sand has been very difficult, but not in this case.
Oh yeah, the desert sand. Yeah, well, not too good for people with contact lenses, perhaps.
No,
No,
I'm sure.
Right, okay.
Any
So
more?
thank you very, very much, Wendy. Thank you.